Hi, everybody. It's Mrs. Murphy, and today we are going to start Unit B, which is all about bonding and intermolecular forces. So a brief overview of Unit B, we're going to start with topic 4, which is bonding and molecular geometry. Then topic 5 is intermolecular forces, and we'll wrap up with topic 6, which is ionic and covalent names and properties. So lesson 4.1 is all about what are ionic bonds and what are covalent bonds. We're going to understand the differences between how those bonds are formed, and we'll also take a look at some other types of bonding called metallic and network covalent bonds. So first, let's start with a general definition of what is a bond. Atoms in general are usually less stable by themselves than when they're combined with other atoms. So atoms are going to combine with other atoms to become more stable, and that's called a chemical bond. Chemical bonds are the mutual electrical attraction between the nuclei and valence electrons of different atoms that binds the atoms together. So over here on the left, the right-hand side, you can see we've got these positive symbols, that's indicating a nucleus. And then this bluish purple circles are the electron clouds, and showing that they're overlapping and they're sharing some of those valence electrons. So that's an example of a bond, specifically a covalent bond. There's two main categories of bonding that we're going to be focusing on, although I will touch on some others, and that is ionic bonds and covalent bonds. So what determines the type of bond that something forms? How are we going to be able to tell if something's an ionic bond or a covalent bond? It all comes down to electronegativity, which you'll remember we learned about in topic 3, which was periodic trends. So as a reminder, electronegativity is the ability of an atom to attract electrons from another atom in a bond. So we're talking about two atoms that are in a bond, and they're pulling on each other's electrons. You can kind of think of it like a tug of war between the two nuclei for those electrons. Both nuclei are attracted to the electrons and they're both pulling on them. But some atoms are better at pulling on the electrons than others. So we end up with what's called a difference in electronegativity. Two atoms that have the same electronegativity, there's no difference. We could say the difference is about 0. They're going to form what's called a nonpolar covalent bond. Nonpolar covalent bond. When they have a little bit of a difference in electronegativity, when one atom is more electronegative than the other, when one atom is pulling harder on those electrons, that creates what's called a polar covalent bond. And that range we assign to be about a difference of 0.4 to 1.7. So when you look at the electronegativities of each atom, when you subtract them, if the difference is between 0.4 and 1.7, we consider that a polar covalent bond. And then finally, when the difference in electrons is electronegativity is so large, one atom is pulling so much harder, it literally is able to remove the electron from the other atom. That's called an ionic bond. The difference is really, really large in electronegativity. So one atom has a much higher electron density, meaning it has the electrons more than the other. That's called an ionic bond. The electrons are completely transferred. They're not even being shared anymore. So here are some GIFs to kind of illustrate that tug of war. So this first one is showing a non-polar covalent bond. These two golden retrievers have that tennis ball in their mouth, and they're both pulling on it, but they're pulling equally. So it doesn't look like it's moving. It's being shared equally between them. In this next GIF, we've got a much bigger dog. So we can imagine it's probably going to be tugging harder on that toy. And you can see The bigger dog is pulling harder on the toy. The little dog is struggling to hold on to it, but this big guy is definitely getting more playtime with that toy. And then finally, so that's a polar covalent bond, unequal tugging of electrons. And then finally, in this last GIF, we have a big dog and a little puppy. And the big dog rips the toy away from the little puppy, but the little puppy is still attracted to the toy, so he's following the big dog around. That's called an ionic bond. It's the complete transfer of electrons resulting in attraction of a cation to anion. So the key piece here is the big dog rips away the toy, but then the little dog, the puppy, is still attracted to it, so he's still following him around. That's an ionic bond. So non-polar covalent equally shares the electrons. Polar covalent is unequal, but it's still sharing. And ionic is complete transfer of the electrons. And all of this is due to the electronegativity. So we can predict the bond type between two atoms by calculating the absolute value, which means no negative numbers. So if you get a negative number, just chop it off, make it the absolute value of the electronegativity difference between the atoms in the bond. So definitely make sure you write down this table. If the electronegativity difference is 0 to 0.3, it's non-polar covalent. If it's 0.3 to 1.7, it's polar. And if it's more than 1.7, it is ionic. So for example, fluorine has an electronegativity of 4.0. And sodium has an electronegativity of 0.9. When sodium and fluorine form a bond, we can predict the type of bond by calculating the electronegativity difference. All that means is I'm going to subtract these two numbers. So I took fluorine's electronegativity and I subtracted sodium's. So 4 minus 0.9 is 3.1. My electronegativity difference is 3.1. If I look at the chart, 3.1 falls into this category. It's greater than 1.7, which means that bond between sodium and fluorine is ionic. Due to that very large difference in electronegativity. Let's talk more about ionic bonds. So ionic bonds are a chemical bond that result from the attraction of cations and anions. Remember, cations are positively charged, anions are negatively charged. So you have these opposite charges, and we know that opposite charges attract each other. In pure ionic bonding, electrons are transferred from one atom to another, meaning one of our atoms gives its electron to the other completely. It's removed. So in this example, our sodium becomes Na plus because it's losing an electron. The chlorine, it's gaining electron to become Cl minus. And now we have this positive and negative charge, and they're going to be attracted to one another. Very often you're going to see that ionic bonds are formed between metals and nonmetals because they have very different electronegativities. They're on opposite sides of the periodic table. When we talk about ionic compounds, we refer to them as formula units. So a formula unit is the lowest whole number ratio of ions represented in an ionic compound. So as you can see here, a whole crystal of sodiums and chlorines ionically bonded together kind of forms this big grid, and it's repetitive. We've got sodium, chlorine, sodium, chlorine, sodium, chlorine, sodium, chlorine. But that can be reduced down to the lowest ratio. For every one sodium ion, there's always one chloride ion, which is why we call the formula unit for that bond between Na and Cl, it's just called NaCl. That's the lowest ratio, one sodium to one chlorine. Over here, This is depicting iron 3 oxide, also known as rust. And in this, if you counted out all of these red dots and all of these gray dots, in any crystal of iron 3 oxide, you'd have 2 irons for every 3 oxygens. So our lowest ratio of iron to oxygen is Fe2O3, 2 irons to 3 oxygens. So that is the formula unit of the compound that forms between iron and oxygen. Covalent bonding, remember, it means we're sharing electrons. So covalent bonds are the chemical bond that shares the electrons between 2 atoms. And covalent bonds tend to form between non-metals. So anytime you have 2 non-metals bonded together, it is most likely a covalent bond. Now, it could either be non-polar covalent or polar covalent, depending on that electronegativity difference. Non-polar covalent bonds, the electrons are owned equally between the 2 atoms. They are shared equally. Polar covalent bonds, one of the atoms is pulling harder. One of the atoms has a higher electronegativity. But in both cases, polar and nonpolar, those electrons are being shared. So you can see here in this diagram, this carbon is sharing electrons with each of these hydrogens. And that is shown by 2 electrons in between the 2 atoms. And you can't really tell which one belongs to which. They're being shared. They're drawn in the middle. So that is a representation of a covalent bond. When we have groups of covalently bonded atoms, we don't call those formula units. That's just for ionic bonds. So groups of covalently bonded atoms are called molecules. Molecules, by definition, are a neutral group of atoms that are held together by covalent bonds. So we can only use this word molecule referring to covalent compounds. It's in the definition. And unlike ionic formula units, molecules can exist on their own. Remember, with those formula units, they were a reduced ratio of these things that were all kind of bonded together in one big group and you couldn't tell them all apart. Molecules are different. You could pull out one molecule and it stands alone with its own properties. The molecular formula shows us that relative number of atoms of each kind in the chemical compound using element symbols and subscripts. For example, when you have 2 hydrogens covalently bonded to 1 oxygen, like up here in this picture, the oxygen is red, the hydrogens are white. So you can see that in each of these molecules, there are 2 hydrogens covalently bonded to 1 oxygen. That's called the molecular formula. So water's molecular formula is H2O. Oxygen gas is 2 oxygens covalently bonded. That's this picture right here. And that's O2. Sucrose is made up of 12 carbons, 22 hydrogens, and 11 oxygens. That's this guy. So the molecular formula for sucrose is C12H22O11. There are a couple of other types of bonds. We won't spend too much time on them, but I just want to mention them because they do have some relevance to our everyday lives. So metallic bonds occur in metals, and they result from the attraction between metals and the surrounding sea of electrons. Basically, in metals, most metals have lots of energy levels, right? If you look at the periodic table, most of our metals are located in the D and F block. So those electrons are in higher energy levels, farther away from the nucleus. They're very loosely held. They're kind of just like barely held on to that atom. So when you have a whole bunch of metals coming together, forming a bond, those electrons that are loosely held have some mobility. They can kind of move around between those different energy levels. That's the sea of electrons. And that sea of electrons gives those metallic bonds some interesting properties. For example, that's what makes metals so good at conducting electricity. because electricity is the movement of, conductive electricity is movement of charge. Electricity is the movement of electrons. So being able to have those loosely held electrons flow through these metallic bonds is what makes metals so good at conducting electricity. There's also something called network covalent bonds. A network covalent bond is when atoms are bonded in a continuous network of covalent bonds. Basically, that means you can't tell where one covalent bond, covalent molecule ends and the other begins. They're all kind of interconnected. So there's some really popular network covalent compounds you're probably familiar with. One is diamond. So diamond is an example of a network covalent mesh of carbons. So all of these carbons are connected in this kind of structure. That structure is important, and that creates that hard diamond that we're so familiar with. Another network covalent bond of carbon, if it forms differently, if the carbons line up differently, we get what's called graphite. So graphite is what's in your pencils. And what happens is we have the carbons, they kind of all form these hexagons, but then they're all stacked together in sheets that are all stacked on top of each other. And each of those sheets can kind of be sheared off really easily. And that's why when you take your pencil and you write on a piece of paper, you get that thin layer of graphite, because you're literally shearing off a layer of that network covalently bonded molecule. So depending on the arrangement of the atoms, you get different properties, but in general, network covalent compounds have really high melting points, and they're very, very hard because their structures are very rigid. You have all of these atoms that are covalently bonded all together. So that makes them very, very rigid, very hard. So those are some examples of network covalent bonds. So our main focus in bonding is going to be on ionic and covalent bonds, but I've given you just a couple other examples here of other bonds that do exist, metallic and network covalent bonds. But for the rest of the unit, most of our focus will be around ionic bonds and covalent bonds. So that's all I have for you guys in 4.1. If you have any questions, please make sure to let me know. Otherwise, have a great day.